Welcome to the Pipeline and People podcast powered by Versorix, the show where boutique firm leaders trade less admin for more advisory. Each week, we share actionable tactics to keep your client pipeline full and your people performing at their best. I'm your host, Jaden Parisi. Let's get started. Today's guest is Jez Cartwright, executive coach, trusted advisor, and creator of the Performance Intelligence Framework. Jez, thank you so much for being here. To set the
Pleasure.
stage, could you give a little background?
Certainly, yeah. Started my world in the world of professional sport and was consulting with a whole bunch of teams and individuals back in the UK. My first client was the Great Britain diving team, which in 1994 looked like the local beer diving team. They were competing against the Chinese. Chinese were able to go into the water without making a splash, and my fellow compatriots in the UK were making a bit more of a splash. And we ended up having some real robust conversations about saying, right, if we wanted to compete at the same level as the Chinese divers, what did we need to do to change? And British diving went on a unique journey of changing their whole philosophy and setup, and actually started a number of cycles later to start winning gold medals. I ended up working in the English Premier League with a number of different sides. And that's where I learned a lot about the insecurity of elite performers. And that brings me fast forward into the work I do now with CEOs and leaders around the world of just helping them be better at what they do, but by focusing in on what it really takes.
Amazing. It's impressive. How did you get into the diving world?
I knew nothing about diving. I finished a master's in the science of sports coaching, and everybody had to have a one-on-one interview with the professor at the end of it. And he handed me the keys to the department. He said, "You're the kind of guy who could set up his own business, use all the facilities, and off you go."
Wow.
And of course, at 22, when you know everything, you're just like, sure, why not? So off I went, and I just ended up having wrote a letter, and somebody answered it. And that was the sort of philosophy, really, that I've carried on through all my life. If you come across people, you ask if you can be of help. And it's amazing what you get back at certain times.
Yeah, that's incredible. Okay, so the roadmap for this conversation, we're going to go over a few things. I'd like to start off with quiet shift, what you're seeing in consulting talent, what high performers secretly crave, leadership blind spots that are kind of blocking progress. And then I'd like to dive into how you implement these ideas and this practice into your own business as you scale. And then finally, we'll wrap up with one practical move that firms can take this quarter. Sound good?
Sounds great. Let's
All
get going.
right. So first segment, quiet shift. On LinkedIn, I see a lot of your content. You sign off with it's about doing better, being better, demanding better. Where do you see consulting firms kind of settling for just good enough? And how is top talent, signaling that they expect more?
I think it's hard for a lot of consulting firms because the model is about sometimes getting into an organization and selling more. I come at it from a very different point of view. I'm a performance coach. I'm all about performance. And there's a wonderful piece, I think it was Andre Agassi's coach once said, is that he gets paid a lot of money, but he risks getting fired every single day because he wanted to push his athletes to what he believes they could achieve. And that's the same for me. Is I'm not going to shy away from a conversation, however complicated or difficult that might be. And that's where I think I see a lot of coaches and consultants, they're getting the paycheck. So, and there is that sort of human dimension of, do I really want to push this client or do I want to take the paycheck? And I'm not saying it's always that black and white, but it is hard when you're running a business, and at the end of the day, businesses need to make money. But, often I find being brave and challenging clients will reap its reward. Sometimes it doesn't always work out the way you want it to. That's part of life. But I see a trend at the moment. I think a lot of companies are asking consulting firms and coaches for help. And I think we really need some brave leadership in that space to help those companies, because the challenges don't get less, unfortunately.
For sure. Do you see that kind of push coming mainly from younger consultants, or is it more universal, like across age groups?
I think it's age independent. If anything, I see more hesitancy from the younger consultants. I think the last sort of 5 years has been a roller coaster, and it's created a great deal of uncertainty and insecurity in a lot of people. We've got used to this 2D dynamic of relationships around a Zoom call where Jamie Dimon's rant the other day, he knows people are doing other things on the Zoom call. And how do we stop ourselves from that? But I think we're losing the art of relationship. I was chatting to somebody in the UK this morning, and everybody's got multiple screens open, AI coming in and doing a lot of the thinking for people. And we lose that subtle art of relationship. And my worry is for the younger generation because relationships will evolve and change over time naturally. But I think the things that create those lasting relationships, we're losing that craft, and that worries me.
Yeah, no, I think that's very important. And speaking of relationships, you also posted a great video quoting, "You're 100% responsible for 50% of this relationship."
Yeah.
How does that 50% mindset kind of reshape the way that partners engage with high performers, especially ones that might value more autonomy or independence?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard. Is anybody taking 100% responsibility for their 50%? The answer is probably no. But it's a nice framework because we tend to think it's either all us or all them. And actually, if we're going to create that relationship that works, it is that I'm responsible for my 50%, you're responsible for your 50%. And there's that contract of saying that up front. When you work with teams, that same dynamic plays out. And I think it's important to be loading the front with that conversation. So at least the seed is planted in their mind. So then you can have the conversation later. That 50% that you're responsible for. How are you getting on? There's, humans as by nature will struggle with lots of things. But if we can help each other along that journey and encourage each other, even within all our frailties and failings, then we're building the world into a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. I've also seen it go the other way though, where people think they're 100% responsible for 100% of their relationship. Well, what do you have to say about that?
Well, if anybody's in a relationship with anybody or has a child, if they think that, they know they come unstuck. And as I say to people, it's like, you can only control you. I'd like to be
Okay.
able to control my 3-year-old daughter. There is not a chance that that's ever going to happen. And it's that dialogue. And often we, use the child as a great example of, it's often we're dealing with the child parts of the adult play out. It's when people come to me and say, "Oh, I'm having a real problem with such and such." And you actually realize it's their inner child part playing out, not the adult who's achieved greatness. And sometimes understanding that can just soften and change the approach.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now, kind of shifting on to more blind spots. One of your specialties is servicing the elephant in the room, as you say. What is the biggest elephant consulting leaders kind of still refuse to name when it comes to retention? And what's the cost of avoiding that elephant?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same problem that I come across everywhere around the world. It's the ability to have the difficult conversations. And often it can be with people that they know very, very well. There's been a number of cases where, I've kind of gone into a room and seen how a team dynamic works. And I'm like, what's going on here with this person? It's clear that that person is causing a lot of problems and probably needs to move on. But for whatever the relationship is with that leader, the decision gets passed, it gets overlooked. Everybody else in the room suffers a little bit, I believe, because you know people have to do the extra thinking, they have to put in the extra energy around that one individual. And if you added all that up, the cumulative cost on that is huge. I'm writing a paper at the moment with another psychologist who we're looking at that fundamental dynamic of how do we make those decisions where we know the cost on a personal level could be huge. And I see a lot of CEOs and leaders really struggle with that. A lot of leaders like to be liked. And as a human nature, we tend to like to be liked. And I remember saying to one CEO, do you want to be successful or do you want to be liked? And
Yeah.
he kind of smiled at me and he went, damn it, because it's not always about the taking the easy road and being liked. And I never want people to enjoy firing people, but I want them to be good and robust in how they have the conversation so that when they bump into that person 6 months later, they can have a conversation and it can be a real one of, you probably did the right thing for me. Thank you.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Hire fast, fire fast.
Yeah. But do it well and graciously, because, we are human after all. And, it's tough. We all struggle with our own things.
First, don't want to jeopardize a personal relationship over a work matter, even if it
Yeah.
is firing. Sometimes those conversations need to be had.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, thank you for that. These are all kind of powerful ideas and helpful things for the people watching, but how do you kind of embed some of these tactics that you've been saying kind of into your own business as you serve to scale a large client base?
Yeah, I mean, I was on the phone to one of my clients this morning having the conversation around difficult people. And, I don't give up. It's kind of like, that's why you brought me on. It's also why you pay me up front, because it takes away any worry of me not getting paid. And we lean into it because I think there's very few people who will have real conversations, and a lot of leaders and C-suite are surrounded by yes people. And at some level, that's never going to change because of the sort of system we work in, and people want to have that longevity with their role. But it's the role of myself and other consultants that do this work is like the key. We can see the answer right in front of us. Is how you deliver the message to create that inertia for the people who have the power to make the decisions, And I mean, I love my work. I love my clients. I want them all to be really, really successful. And I've seen a number of playbooks that help that success come alive, and I see the path where it stagnates, and I know which one I would choose every single day. And I put my energy into that, and I believe my clients really feel and thrive on it.
Yeah, for sure. You kind of mentioned, not directly, but like politics, no one wants to upset the boss. How do you navigate that when you're working with your clients?
Sometimes I upset the boss. I mean, look, politics is hard, and it's one skill that isn't taught. I don't see the big business schools going, right, actually we're going to do a course on politics and how to play it. And yet you go into any organization, politics exists. There are certain sacred cows that people won't go anywhere near, and that's why I call out the elephant in the room, because it's just so ineffective to keep it going. And whether it's around a people, a process, or a product, they exist. And part of my role as a consultant is to help that organization uncover that in a way that's not embarrassing or too exposing for people, because there's a great deal of sensitivity around some of these things, and you need to understand that organizational construct to weave your way through. But it's the certain brand of consulting and coaching that I love doing, because unlocking that for people, it's the biggest gift. I remember one client, first time I'd ever met the team, and I walked in and I was like, is anybody, like in my head, I'm like, is anybody seeing this? And the CEO gave me a lift to the airport after the session. And I said, like, you're going to have to get rid of this person. And he was like, what? They've come so highly recommended. They're brilliant, blah, blah, blah. I said, okay, 3 things to look out for. This, and this. He rang me in the morning and he said, I've had a sleepless night because I can't unsee this stuff now, and you're spot on. Now, I didn't push him. I just asked the questions and asked him to be observational of a number of facts, and he saw it. And the minute he made that change, everybody came up to him and went, thank you so much. We were too afraid to say anything.
Wow. You mind if I ask what the 3 things were?
I was worried you were going to ask me that. I can't remember at the time, but I remember there were 3 things. I think it was about how they had interacted with him, how they'd interacted with the team, and some of the promises that they made that they weren't following through on. And when I'd put it out like that, he just saw, oh, this happens a lot. Oh, that. I'm like, okay, what is the impact of that? It was life-changing for him.
That's great. It sounds pretty tricky to uncover things like that, but you seem to be pretty good at it.
Well, I mean, that it's kind of, as a consultant or as a coach, we all individually bring our own craft to it. You might be the Excel guru. Great, then go and do it. For me, it's about that dynamic piece and the team dynamics and that personal performance piece. And that's my expertise. That's what, I've traded my craft and learnt my craft around, and want to keep developing, because if we can help any client, whether it be an individual or a huge enterprise, the impact of that can literally change a huge amount of things. And that's kind of almost like my call to arms, if you like, that keeps me getting up in the morning. And I thoroughly enjoy.
Yeah. I want to touch on something you just kind of said. Everyone has their own expertise. At least one thing I've noticed in my personal experience, maybe you have as well. Do you see a lot of people being kind of misplaced? Like the Excel expert is stuck on just whatever project that they could be put on at the time, business need. And
yeah, I think in the larger consultancies, it is hard, because, they've got clients to service, and there's a headcount piece. And I think as you go on through your career, especially in some of the large consultancies, they're very, very good at saying, right, you do have that Excel expertise. We're going to put you here because I think, and that's where you get the bigger return on your employee as the consultant, but also the client. And I think that, you create that win-win. It's very hard in teams. They don't actually take the time to sit down and go, hey, what are you good at? And what are you good at? And actually, you think you're good at that, but I actually think you're better at this. And the things that people are good at, they probably enjoy. And the things that
Yeah.
they enjoy, they're probably good at. And I think it's getting that mix together that's so, so important. But if you think about whether it be a sports team or a team in the military, they sit down and do the planning and go, right, we need a good goalkeeper. We need a good attacker. We need a good this, a good that. And they go and find the best people. Sometimes in consulting, it's happening too quickly and they don't necessarily take the time to plan. But with the luxury of time, I think you can create some incredible solutions for clients by just being a bit more thoughtful about the skill sets you have in the room.
That's a great parallel to the sports teams. What's the kind of hardest part about practicing what you preach? Maybe what are some of the challenges that have surprised you the most?
Yeah, I think it's around looking after yourself. I'm the resource, and I've got to look after myself. I love the work I do, and sometimes I can either work too hard or um, stay up too late. Or, as I've got older, I've realised that I have to look after myself, and I'm pretty good about getting some balance some of the time. And I think this concept around work-life balance is misplaced in a number of places because I think all of the most successful people I know, and it's not just around work, but about family life as well, is they're very determined to create the time for things. I mean, Marshall Goldsmith, he's just retired, but I see him more on LinkedIn now than I did before. He's 75. Warren Buffett just announced his retirement, 94. I mean, fantastic. And, uh, I'm going to be doing this for a lot longer. And it's not, it's about that helping clients. That's the piece that excites me most. And whether I'm 94 doing this or 53 today, I've that old saying, if you find the thing you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And at some degree, yes, at some degree, no. But like, I know when I'm working hard, but I love the challenge. And, a client had sent me an email saying, oh, could you be in Europe for these 3 days? I'm like, yeah, of course. And I wanted to check my family first, so that was okay for me to go. Um, and I got the thumbs up, and it's just a pleasure. It's a real pleasure to do this job, and I'm very respectful and caring of my clients.
Yeah, it sounds amazing, and you sound very passionate. Do you get to travel a lot?
Yeah, I do. I mean, the reason I'm in the US, obviously, as a Brit, I set up a business here about 8 years ago, and I'd spend every 8 weeks, I'd fly around the world. I'd go to New York, somewhere else, San Francisco, around to Australia, Singapore, and I'd do that loop. I think you've got a huge opportunity to learn from people wherever they are in the world, and the situations are similar and yet wonderfully unique. And I love to see how different cultures approach different situations. And, if we've got an opportunity to learn from that, amazing. And, and that's the thing I love doing is it could be a completely different discipline in something. But if we can learn from that and apply that to a situation over here, wow, because it might just help one person and that person might go on and change a whole bunch of stuff. So it's that thirst for learning of how we can do things differently and better always excites me.
Moving on, I see you posting a lot of things about like meditation and other kind of things like that. If a boutique firm leader wants consultants who stay and grow, what's the first kind of daily ritual that you would advise them to introduce?
There's a wonderful book written by a lady called Nancy Klein, A Time to Think. Although when I first met her and spending time with her on her training course, I was getting so worked up because she was asking me to sit down, stop, and think, and I was like, I want to go to action. Yet, if you look at all great leaders, they take that time away from the coalface or the front on the wall or their boardroom, and they go and sit by themselves and they have some reflection time. Building that time in, whether it be 15 minutes or an hour, just to sit and look and read and think. Because I think if we have that clarity about how we approach the day, we can often achieve more and be more impactful. Listen, it's hard. Sometimes I'm up and I'm straight on a call and I don't practice that the whole time, but I make sure I kind of take some time at some point during the day just to sit and think through things. So I think that's really key. And meditation could mean all sorts of things to all sorts of people. And I think it's whatever practice you find to get the best out of yourself. That's the thing you need to commit to do.
Do you do any journaling at all? Like I've recently started taking up this thing I call top two, where you
Yeah.
sit down to think about what are the two things that I absolutely need to get done today? How am I going to achieve them?
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I go through phases, and I wouldn't want to think people to think that I'm some sort of, kind of guru that's wafting through life and doing all these things perfectly. And I think you need to find the things that work for you at your stage of life in the situation you find yourself in. And it might work one day and it might not work another. And it's about how do you keep working to find out the things that work for you. And I think, encourage you to just spend a little bit of time looking after yourself. It's like, right, what do I want to achieve? And what are the tricks and tips that I need to, and tools that I need to help me along that way?
Great. We're going to do a little kind of rapid fire to close things out. I have three
Sure.
quick questions. Want you to give a quick 20, 30-second answer. Just don't think whatever's on the top of your head. Sound good?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. What is the biggest myth in executive performance coaching?
A lot of executives think it's about a lot of mumbo jumbo. And I go back to the sort of advice that I give to people is like, look at any number one ranked athlete in the world. They have a plethora of coaches available to them because their desire is to learn to be better at what they do. Don't leave your performance to chance.
Okay, great. Next one. One habit every consulting leader should adopt next week.
Get out, network. Whether you're using digital cards or old style business cards, always carry them, always be prepared for a conversation. And your energy will transmit what people find. And you've just be passionate about what you do or get out.
And finally, you've been in sports a long time, high performance sports. I see a lot of golf and F1 and basketball on your LinkedIn. Which of those sports or another delivers kind of the single best leadership lesson, and what is it?
I think a lot of sports you can use as some great analogies. Just watching Rory McIlroy win the Masters a few weeks back was incredible. Everything he'd gone through, and he put all the supporters through the ringer, especially on that last putt on 18. But it's the discipline. You look at somebody like a Caitlin Clark, who religiously got up at 4 a.m. to go and train to do the extra stuff. And there's a reason why she's one of the best players, if not the best player in the world right now. But you see these athletes who put in the work, and it's really interesting if you compare Rory McIlroy to LeBron. When Rory won the Masters, there were so many other players in the professional game who were so happy for him. And I think in a work environment, how often are we really happy for a colleague or a compatriot within the workspace? It's often like the response that LeBron got when he lost. Everybody was really happy he lost. And I thought that's a really interesting dynamic. And what is it about how we show up does create either one of those responses?
Amazing. I think a great example of that is Kobe Bryant.
Well, Kobe Bryant was amazing. Like, the world has lost one of its stars in so many ways. But when he was interviewed and the female interviewee asked him, what inspires you more? Is it about really wanting to win or the fear of losing? And he went, neither. It's about wanting to learn how to be better at what I do every single day. And this was one of the best guys in the world at what he did. Imagine if we all took that approach in the work that we do, we'd move mountains.
For sure. All right. Well, Jez, fantastic insights. Thank you so much.
Yes, mate.
For listeners who want to kind of dive deeper into performance intelligence, where can they find you?
Come to jezcartwright.com, and there's a whole bunch that's coming to performance intelligence that we'll be talking about and releasing over the next few weeks and months ahead. So watch out, and there's going to be some videos on YouTube where a lot of people can learn a lot of things from some of the best people in the world at what they do.
If today's conversation resonated, share this episode with a colleague, tag Jez on LinkedIn with your biggest takeaway. I'm Jaden Parisi. This is the Pipeline and People podcast by Versorix. See you next time.